Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Jenna Kolstad, and the topic of my presentation today is British literature during the Romantic period. The reason that this topic is useful for you is that it's important to learn about British literature during the Romantic period. There are some fantastic authors that don't necessarily get as much recognition as they should, particularly for social and political contributions as they provided the English culture. First, we will be talking about the time period of the novel, the author, and the major literary works. Secondly, we will be discussing the historical period. Finally, we're going to look at a heroine in the literature Pride and Prejudice, written by Jane Austen in 1813. First, I will summarize the literary period. The Romantic period within the confines of the British literature came about at the turn of the 19th century. This period was fueled by ideas of personal and political liberty and the energy of sublimity of the natural world, artists and intellectuals who wanted to break the bonds of 18th century convention. The literary works of Rousseau and Godwin had a great influence on the Romantic period. That being said, the French Revolution and its aftermath had the greatest impact on the literary time period. The Romantic vision had taken forms other than political, and these developed quickly. Now we will move on to the second point, which is about the historical period. In lyrical ballads, which came about in 1798 and 1800, a division began in the literary history when Wordsworth and Coleridge presented and illustrated a liberating aesthetic that poetry should express in genuine language, experience as filtered through personal emotion and imagination. The truest experience was to be found in nature. The power of the sublime could be felt almost immediately. Wordsworth's romanticism is probably most fully realized in his greatest autobiographical poem, The Prelude. In search of sublime moments, romantic poets wrote about the marvelous and supernatural, the exotic and the medieval, but they also found beauty in the lives of simple rural people and aspects of the everyday world. The second generation of Romantic poets included poets such as John Keats, Percy Shelley, and George Gordon, also including Lord Byron. In Keats' great odes, intellectual and emotional sensibility come together in a language of great power and beauty. Although the infamous Jane Austen wrote during the Romantic era, her novels defy classification. With insight, grace, and irony, she defines human relationships within the context of the English country life. Sir Walter Scott, a Scottish nationalist and romantic, made the genre of the historical novel widely popular. Other novelists of the period were Maria Edgeworth, Edward Bulwer-Lytton, and Thomas Love Peacock, the latter for his eccentric novels satirizing the Romantics. Lastly, we will move to the third point, which is to focus on Elizabeth Bennet, the heroine of one of Jane Austen's most famous literary works, Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth is the second daughter in the Bennet family and the most intelligent and quick-witted. Elizabeth is the protagonist of Pride and Prejudice and one of the most well-known female characters in English literature. Her admirable qualities are numerous. For example, she is lovely, clever, and in a novel defined by dialogue, she converses as brilliantly as anyone. Her honesty, virtue, and lively wit enable her to rise above the nonsense and bad behavior that pervade her class-bound and often spiteful society. Nevertheless, her sharp tongue and tendency to make hasty judgments often lead her astray. Pride and Prejudice is essentially the story of how she overcomes obstacles, including her own personal failings to find romantic happiness. Elizabeth must not only cope with a hopeless mother, a distant father, 2 badly behaved younger siblings, and several snobbish, antagonizing females. She must also overcome her own mistaken impressions of Darcy, which initially lead her to reject his proposals of marriage. Her charms are sufficient to keep him interested, fortunately, while she navigates familial and social turmoil. As she gradually comes to recognize the nobility of Darcy's character, she realizes the error of her initial prejudice against him. In conclusion, I want the audience to know and understand the difference between authors of British literature throughout the Romantic period, including but certainly not limited to Jane Austen, who was a brilliant person and writer. She wrote very strong characters, but especially female characters. Her female characters knew what they wanted and weren't afraid to go after it. So to recap, the things I've discussed are the literary period, authors and major literary works, the historical period, and a literary heroine of the time, which in this case is Elizabeth Bennet. Thank you, and I will take any questions at this time.